Welcome to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times, sponsored by MSA Safety. In this series, we bring you sessions from the Emergency Services Show and the Emergency Tech Show 2025. Professor Richard Aldrich joins the Emergency Tech Show to give an invigorating keynote speech on AI technologies, drawing on his extensive work from the world of security and spies. He explains that with a tsunami of data sweeping towards us, we must engage with new technologies, but shows that the smart choices are about resilience rather than radical transformation. Listen on to find out more.
What am I here to talk about today? I'm here to talk to you about the future of sabotage. I'm here to talk to you about the future of secret warfare, the future of covert action. So why am I showing you a photograph of something that's more than 50 years old? Why am I showing you? Well, can anyone tell me who this is? Blofeld. Blofeld. I mean, any excuse to show you Blofeld. I love Blofeld. But why am I showing you a photograph of something that's 50 years old? Really, because when Ian Fleming was writing the Bond novels, he fairly quickly got bored with the Cold War. The Cold War is quite boring. And he became more interested in the era that we're in now, the era of the hybrid threat. Because Blofeld and so many of Fleming's Bond villains are hybrids. They're part spy chief, they're part terrorist, they're part criminal, and they're a very large part technology fanatic. And they're exactly the sorts of people that our intelligence agencies began to confront in places like Colombia and the former Yugoslavia beginning in the 1990s. They didn't have a cat and a monorail, but they did have their own IBM mainframe computers. They did have their own fleets of mini submarines. So these sorts of Bond villains are increasingly common in our international society. Why is that? Partly because of technology. The way in which technology has been leveraged, particularly by the tech bros, particularly in California, has caused some problems. Their strapline for years has been move fast and break things. In other words, enter an existing market that has traditional structures, disrupt it, rewire it, mess things up, and run away before the regulators notice. So what that really means is a lot of the people here today are helping to clean up some of that mess. That's quite a general assertion. Let's look at this in practice. Let's talk about some recent conflicts around the world which we're all aware of. Let's talk about the Ukraine. In the Ukraine war, GCHQ, our main national technical authority, estimates there's somewhere around 1 million people fighting in that war, but they're not in the Ukraine and they're not in Russia. Where are they? They're in Australia, they're in Fiji, they're in Greece, they're in the Gulf, they're in Canada, because both the Ukraine and Russia have quite big diasporas. These people are very technically adept and they want to fight in the conflict and they're doing it online. And they're boosted by countries that are supporting them, and they're boosted by some of the big techs. The big techs are now themselves like countries. They are quasi-sovereign, and they're pouring money and resources into this secret conflict. What does this mean for us? It means that 5 years ago, I would be very comfortable standing in front of you and saying there are categories here. There's activists and activists over there. There's cyber criminals over there. There's cyber terrorists over there. There's some national patriotic disinformation people over there. And in the corner, the really spooky guys, the guys from GCHQ and the National Security Agency who do the really high-level stuff. Those boundaries have gone. Disruption. People are jumping the species barrier. And that's very exciting, but it's also very dangerous. Let's talk about another couple of wars. Let's talk about Syria and Libya. In the first decade of this century, the United States and a lot of other countries, including the UK, became involved in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the cost of those wars mounted, so when Barack Obama wanted to become involved in Syria and Libya, it wasn't politically possible to put in conventional boots on the ground. So what did Obama do? Obama turned to something which he called smart power, which I actually prefer to call dirty power. So cyber, mercenaries, special forces, funding violent non-state groups. 20 years ago, you had states supporting law and order over there, and you had the bad guys over there. In the international system, again, the boundaries have largely broken down. And a number of countries, including the United States, were giving millions and billions in weapons to some really quite questionable people in those conflicts. Why should this interest us? Because some of these people are turning up on our doorstep. Some of you will be aware of a very interesting case that emerged this year. Some local lads, and I do mean local lads, they're from Leicester. They were arrested in the B&Q car park in Leicester. What were these people doing? They'd been recruited on Telegram by Russian military intelligence using mercenaries as a proxy to do sabotage. They set fire to a warehouse supplying the Ukraine. They were getting ready to use explosives. They were getting ready to kidnap and abduct a high-profile Russian exile. All this without the Russians setting foot in the country because they were groomed and trained and encouraged and persuaded that they were James Bond. They weren't. And given a lot of money. They were paid over cryptocurrency. These are actual photographs of the money they were given. What these guys from Leicester didn't understand was the most important part of the operation was that they should be expendable. They should be discovered. Because what the Russians wanted to do was do a secret operation that then got publicity. Because that's how you spread fear, that's how you do coercion. That's the new style of covert operation. Why are we seeing this new style of secret warfare? It's really because in the digital world, it's very hard to hide anything. We're making a digital replica of the real world in constant time. And a lot of the technologies around you today are evidence of that. What does that mean? It means in practice, it's very hard to do an old style, special operation, covert action and hide it. In the Cold War, when the CIA, when MI6, when the KGB did a covert operation, the phrase was plausible deniability. Because if you're going out into the world and you're doing an assassination or you're doing arson or blowing up a bridge, obviously that physical event can't be hidden. What you're trying to do is distance yourself. What you're trying to achieve is plausible deniability. But the new phrase is implausible deniability. That's the new fashion. Who began this fashion? Probably Barack Obama with the strike on Osama bin Laden. That strike, I think most experts say, really should have been done with cruise missiles, with maybe a bombing run afterwards, much less controversial, much less provocative, much less risky. The joint CIA Special Forces team who did the operation lost a helicopter on the way in. So why did they do it like that? The White House tells us it's because we wanted to be sure. That isn't true. They were already getting ready to make the film. The reason they did that operation was because of Hollywood. Obama wanted to have performative secrecy. And that's exactly what we've seen with the Saudis killing a journalist in Turkey, very sadly. It's exactly what we've seen with Trump's strike on Soleimani, the Iranian Special Forces chief. And it's particularly what we saw in Salisbury. Salisbury, the chemical attack in Salisbury, is a perfect example of performative secrecy. The use of a nerve agent that could only really be traced back to Russia, and people who actually didn't seem to mind having their photographs taken. Will AI save us from this situation? Will the technologies that are being advertised today improve our security? Yes, they will, but they're also helping the bad guys. They're increasing the scale of disinformation. And my worry is that AI will put weapons in the hands of the bad guys that they don't normally have access to. So typically, precursor materials for biological and chemical warfare. But the biggest problem is scaling up. More and more of this stuff at volume, at scale. Why is it being scaled up? Because if we went around this exhibition and we asked people, tell us what you think the internet is. A lot of people would say, well, it's a thing for connecting people. It's a thing for communicating. At the end of the 20th century, human beings were not connected. Now we're all in constant touch. Getting on for 8 billion human beings, all connected. Connection, communication, connectivity is not a bad definition, but I want to offer you an alternative definition. The internet, I think, is a vast Xerox machine on a planetary scale that's running out of control. It's a machine for copying stuff. Why is that a security problem? Quite simply because if we use a conventional weapon, a bullet, a cruise missile, if that weapon is fired, when it hits its target, it is deformed or destroyed. When you fire a cyber weapon, it isn't destroyed. It copies itself, sometimes millions of times. And the bad guys can harvest and reuse that stuff. And that's why cyber weapons particularly are hard to control. Many of you will remember an attack on the National Health Service about 8 years ago. It was called the WannaCry attack. It's the closest we've had to a national cyber emergency. That attack was perpetrated by proxies close to North Korea, but the technology they used was stolen from the United States. Very high-grade cyber weapons, impossible to control. But it's not actually the high-grade stuff that worries me. It's the low-grade stuff. The low-grade stuff that supports AI. What is AI? It's algorithms, it's computer power. Above all, it's big data, often collected by loads of inanimate devices around us. And when I talk about the Internet of Things and when I talk about big data, It's a little bit of a sigh. Is it not very exciting? I think this stuff is really exciting and it's very dangerous. Why? Because in 5 years' time, anything you buy in a shop that costs more than £50 is going to be sending data back to the people who made it. Why? Well, the people who sell you this stuff, your new fridge, a toaster, my shoes, whatever, they're going to tell you it's convenient. Your fridge will tell you when you're running out of cheese. My shoes will tell me how much I weigh after I've eaten all that cheese. But actually what they're doing is they're making more money from the data they're collecting than they are for what you're paying for the item. And the problem here is as we extend the Internet of Things to everything around us, these cheap devices have almost no money invested in their security. So the question is, in 3 years' time, who's going to do a software update on my toaster? Who's going to put a new firewall on my vacuum cleaner? And you say, I don't care. Who cares? We don't update these things. We just, when they're worn out, they go to the tip. Actually, Adam Hench at Sydney University says about 20% of these devices can kill us. So your university challenge moment, what sort of device caused the Grenfell fire? A fridge, a domestic appliance. What if in 5 years' time, I've discovered a flaw in just 3% of the fridges in Birmingham, and I can hack all those fridges at the same time on a windy day, middle of August, midday when most people are out at work, and cause them all to catch fire at the same time. What are the consequences of that for our emergency services? Those are the sorts of hazards that are coming towards us, and they're coming towards us quite quickly. So, will AI save us? And what does a sabotage emergency look like in the age of artificial intelligence? It's almost certainly going to be hybrid. What sort of scenario do I envisage? Well, maybe an escalation in the conflict with Russia. Maybe not all-out war, but maybe some fighting on the border of Poland and Finland, perhaps. And at this point, Russia uses proxy actors of the kind that I've just talked about, but on a bigger scale, to conduct a large program of sabotage and arson across Europe, arranged over Telegram. At the same time, high-grade ransomware is launched against the systems that we use to command and control our emergency services. And in some cases that ransomware works, in some cases it doesn't. But it's highly disruptive. And at the same time, our opponents are using those very sensors to feed in a very high volume of disinformation. That's the kind of scenario that I think is entirely plausible and that we might be confronting in 1, 2, 3 years' time.
This episode of the Emergency Services Times podcast is sponsored by MSA Safety, proudly supporting emergency services and first responders on the front line. At MSA Safety, protecting first responders isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We work closely with fire and rescue services across the UK to develop and deliver safety solutions designed to meet your ever-evolving needs. That includes MSA Bristol Firefighter PPE, trusted by services across the UK and beyond, shaped through years of collaboration with frontline teams. It also includes our growing investment in innovation and technology, from the connected M1 SCBA modular solution to our agile, fully managed service model that helps keep crews protected and ready to respond. But for us, safety goes beyond equipment. We believe in standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others, whether it's supporting firefighter charities, backing mental health initiatives, or showing up for community events. MSA is proud to be part of the emergency services family. To learn more about our work in the UK and how we're supporting first responders every step of the way, visit www.msasafety.com. With MSA Safety, when you go in, we go in with you.
Now the difficult bit, for every gloomy tech person, there's always the question, what's the solution? AI will help. But as you can see, AI is also working for the bad guys. So I think other aspects of technology are equally important. And here I'm drawing particularly on the ideas of someone called David Omand, who ran GCHQ quite a few years ago and then was head of resilience in the Cabinet Office. And he would say, yes, AI, but even more important, resilient communications and resilient data, and particularly communications across and beyond your organizations. Why? Because in these sorts of situations, warning is really important. It's not going to come from the head of GCHQ. It's not going to come from the top spies. It's going to come from someone doing an everyday job, probably on the periphery or beyond your organization, who just notices something a little bit odd, something that isn't quite right. And across these hybrid, public-private, very complex organizations that we now work in, that's where we're going to find the solutions. A few minutes ago, I talked about WannaCry, which was the most serious cyber attack on the UK in living memory. Who solved that? Not a top person in the Cabinet Office, not the National Crime Agency. It was a hobbyist hacker in his back bedroom, a guy called Mick Hutchins, who discovered the kill switch. Bit of an odd chap. He saved the world and then he was arrested by the FBI for hacking, but that's just kind of how it goes. But it's those people, dare I say, slightly eccentric, weird people. They're the people who are going to save you. Treasure your weirdos. And you also need backup. You need an antiques roadshow plan. When your technology goes south, you need an alternative and you need to have exercised the use of it. So I'm going to close here and say, what does a really good emergency service look like in the 21st century? Yes, it's high tech, but it's also deliberately a little bit fuzzy. It's exactly the opposite of what someone from the Warwick Business School would tell you to organize. It's a little bit ambient. It's a little bit messy. It's very interactive. It has overlap. It has duplication. And above all, it's tolerant of eccentricity. And Britain had an organization like that the business school would hate. It was called Bletchley Park. And actually, it worked really well. Thank you.
Professor Aldrich, thank you very much. That was terrifying. Can I ask then, to begin, and we will open the floor to questions in a moment, you gave all these examples of where AI can be dangerous, where tech can be dangerous. There's instance like the Stuxnet worm, for example, that was arguably a good, from the UK's perspective, use of technology. But behind all of these is still a human. Those people who were arrested in the B&Q car park, they were recruited not by an AI chatbot, but on Telegram via other people. So do we really need to be that terrified about this pace of AI development? Because it is still people behind it.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of hype about AI, and quite often when you see something that's AI and it's really good, there are humans behind the curtain scrubbing it up. Yes, I think we do need to be worried about AI, and I'm kind of going to go big picture here. this is an odd thing for me to say because I'm a bit of an AI skeptic in terms of what AI can achieve. So there's a really big, because trillions are being spent on AI, particularly in California, there's some pretty big claims. I don't actually think AI is that creative or original. It's good at doing routine tasks. It's good at repeating things. But the aspect of this that people are reluctant to admit is actually people aren't very creative either. You know, I'm a professor at a university. I'm supposed to be doing creative things. Actually, what do I do? What was I doing yesterday? I was marking essays. And as I marked my 126th essay, it was much the same task as marking my 125th. So what this means is that actually very large numbers of human beings in a very great range of occupations are going to be replaced. What's the problem there? I think specifically in the area of emergency services, what happens if we replace people with AI and on the day of a really big crisis, the AI doesn't work? What happens if we keep even the same number of people, but they're very dependent on AI, and then when the crisis happened, AI isn't available? And what happens if we replace very large numbers of people who are commercial drivers and work in factories, and they're not re-employed? So typically in the United States, about 5% of the workforce are commercial drivers. They're driving Amazon delivery vans, lorries, they're driving Ubers. In San Francisco now, we have driverless taxis. Are all those people, am I going to be retrained to write Beethoven's next Fifth Symphony? Am I going to be producing world-class pottery? No. I'm going to be redundant probably. What happens to all those people? I think we're looking at very significant social and economic dislocation. And I think, you know, the security agencies, the police, the emergency services are actually going to be on the tidal wave. They're going to be on the receiving end of that tsunami of economic and social dislocation.
In what way? Why do you say that?
Because if you have those numbers of people unemployed and dissatisfied and unpaid in the workplace, you're going to have you're going to have riots, frankly. This is a big worry in Europe. It's a big worry in the United States. The place where it is most worrying, of course, is China, because what China's done is the productivity deal. China said, we'll lift you out of rural poverty, we'll put you in nice clean cities, we'll give you factory jobs. And the deal is you're nice to the Chinese Communist Party. But they've got 26% youth unemployment and climbing. And they don't really know what to, that's why they're investing in facial recognition. They don't really know what to do about it. That problem's coming to a town near us pretty soon as well.
I want to pick up on your remarks you made about the Internet of Things. This hall is full of devices, cameras, radios, sensors, all sorts of things which have chips inside them, are connected over the last couple of days on this stage. Dozens of people saying, this camera docks and it uploads your footage. This radio, you know, this piece of kit scans your radio comms, uses AI, etc., etc. There's a huge enthusiasm, a huge excitement. Are we blindly rushing into something without planning ahead?
So I think what we have in this hall is the Internet of Emergency Services. And in many instances, this is great because it's giving us warning of forest fires, it's feeding in data, it's allowing more targeted responses. And the devices in this hall cost mostly more than £50. So they have good security. It's not these devices I'm worried about. It's the stuff we're going to buy in Currys. It's the stuff we're going to buy in Argos. So technology is helping us on this side of the fence, but it's not helping us on the other side of the fence. And I've talked about all these fanciful cyber weapons that are getting out into the public domain. But as we saw only a few months ago, it's not always a cyber attack that takes out your fancy system. It's not necessarily a Stuxnet stolen from the National Security Agency. It's not necessarily a hacker's toy. What we saw were all the airlines pretty much in the UK immobilized for an entire day just because of a software update. This was, am I allowed to say the names of the companies? There, some of them are here, but there was a large company that put out this software update that shall be nameless, who used a third-party provider, who were very respected, and it just took everybody offline pretty much for 24 hours. And when that happened, I thought, oh, it's the Russians, it's the North Koreans. It wasn't. It was our own software providers.
Well, is there a role then for government to be doing more? Because as you say, these are all third-party providers. These are all businesses. You could have a company making software for the NHS that scans health records, and it's working one day and it goes bust the next. And all of a sudden there's no software upgrades, there's no firmware upgrades, and the system becomes vulnerable. Is that government's job then to step in?
So this is a fascinating question. So I think traditionally, and I trained as a historian, we kind of think of national security as the job of government. If government doesn't provide national security, why am I paying my income tax? But actually, as we move into the realm of cyberspace, probably about 90% of the public infrastructure is in private hands. And so there simply isn't the capacity at GCHQ, the National Cybersecurity Centre, to protect all those things. And this is a real source of anxiety. In the Cabinet Office, they sit there daily worrying about what is actually critical national infrastructure. What do we need to protect? Nuclear power stations, obviously, we don't want Putin hacking our nuclear power stations. Do we need to protect water? Yes. Do we need to protect food supplies? Yes. Transport, electricity, schools. The list gets ever longer. And it's very, very expensive to do this, and it's difficult because this stuff is kind of in the public sector.
So when it comes to those in the room who work with the emergency services, what's their personal responsibility then? I mean, it goes beyond just making sure the software is up to date on your iPhone. You have to make sure that all the bits of kit you're using are checked, working, proper, up to date. What role do these people have?
So I think, because of that context, particularly private providers, suppliers, and some of the very best ones are here today, have some huge responsibilities. They have some responsibilities in terms of robustness, resilience. To some extent, the very fabric of our society now depends on responsible private actors. But they also have responsibilities in areas like privacy. As the Internet of Things and the Internet of Emergency Services gathers more and more data, and it is a lot of data. The IBM guys are over there. IBM tell us human beings gathered more data in the last 6 months than in all of human history. There's a lot of private data there. So protecting that data.
That's a problem though, because if we in the UK, for example, want to be careful about privacy, protection of data, that by the very nature slows things down because regulations do slow things down. Meanwhile, you might have North Korea and Russia who don't care about regulations and will work apace, and their technology then supersedes ours.
Yes, absolutely. And this is the primary argument for not regulating AI. AI is regulated in the European Union. It's not much regulated elsewhere because of this sense of strategic competition. AI is very difficult to regulate because it moves so fast. It's a classic example of move fast and break things. The European Union has put out an AI Act just 2 years ago. I'm not going to talk about regulation very much because I see everybody just nodding off. But why were they doing that? Because essentially they wanted to get ahead of Germany. They thought Germany was going to impose some really restrictive AI regulation, and they put in some kind of shandy drinkers regulation. So even where we do have AI regulation, it's not actually very strong. That has a lot to do with a sense of competition with China and commercial pressures. I think the regulation around GDPR has been better. It's not perfect. And I'd say actually a lot of the data which people in this room are collecting and using is not necessarily GDPR sensitive.
Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask Professor Aldrich?
My name's Mark Rowe from Professional Security. So thank you ever so much, Professor, for your talk, and particularly for the reference to Blofeld. So, showing my age maybe, I do remember that in the movies, the good guys always abseiled down into the volcano and shot their way into defeat Blofeld. So perhaps surely we can reverse engineer all the things you've described and go after the bad guys.
It's quite
Can
simple.
we?
The tech does so much. Ultimately,
Yeah, why
we've got
not?
the military.
Why not send in the guys with the balaclavas and the black plimsolls and the blow darts and everything? There's a lot of that, but because the internet is global, many of the bad guys are hiding in areas that are difficult to access. Some of this has been kept from us, but in a number of instances, countries have just got really, really annoyed with cyber attacks, and they've wanted to send in the guys with the blow darts and the silenced pistol. Example would be the Colonial Pipeline hack. Remarkable. Not that long ago, you probably saw it in the news, hackers attacked the main pipeline that carried fuel across the United States. Airlines stopped flying. People were carrying petrol for their cars in carrier bags from supermarkets. Extraordinary stuff. And the White House said, pay the ransom. Remarkable. They paid over millions. But once they paid over the millions, they sent in the guys in the balaclavas to try and track down the perpetrators. But it's hard. These guys are, if it's just one person with a laptop, you're not finding a volcano. You're not finding a moon base hidden in the Pacific. One guy with a laptop can do an awful lot of damage. Thank you.
Thank you, firstly, for a very interesting presentation. My name is Rob Evans. I'm from Public Safety and Home Office. You were talking about essentially of people becoming obsolete, changing technology, putting people out of work, etc. This is something that's happened successively through history with technological changes. What's your sense that this time we won't be able to adapt to it as we have done before, or will we be able to adapt to it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, I think at least, in any AI debate, at least 40, 50% of people in the room are making exactly that argument. That we've seen this decade after decade, century after century, the arrival of the printing press, the arrival of the telephone, the arrival of the telegram, which is really pretty much the internet in a way. So this is not new. And the argument is the technology produces more jobs. Why is AI different? I think partly because it's moving so fast, so society doesn't have time to retrain and reschool, but also because of the economic structures. So what AI and the current kind of disruptive digital approach is driving is a very deliberate attempt to have large businesses that employ almost no people. When Facebook was, when one of the social media companies was sold, it wasn't Facebook, they were sold for billions and they had 50 employees. That's the model. So a very deliberate desire not to retrain and reuse people, but instead simply to cut down the numbers of people who are employed. That's the model. But of course, anybody who's kind of done first-year economics knows this is a problem because those companies are making a lot of money in the short term, but eventually, who's going to buy their products? And this is what I mean about medium scale, significant economic and social disruption. By that time, Zuckerberg will have headed off to his bunker in New Zealand and will have closed the door. But we'll be picking up the pieces. The Home Office, will be picking up the pieces.
Thank you very much. We're nearly out of time, but if I may, final thoughts, future success and failure of AI, what's going to happen?
I mean, I have to say, I've been skeptical and critical about AI, and have tried to talk about how it's potentially helping the bad guys, but wherever AI is doing the job of a super Excel spreadsheet, it's fantastic. As long as we don't over-expect. So medical advances. I think, I'm of a certain age. I want to live forever. I'm hoping I'll still be here talking to you in 200 years' time. And I think, well, hopefully AI is going to allow me to do that.
Well, we shall see. Thank you very much for that. Very interesting. If you could join me in thanking Professor Richard Aldrich.
Thanks for listening. Remember that by taking time to learn from our speakers, you can earn CPD points from our partner CPDme. So do check out the link in the show notes. Our thanks to MSA Safety for their continued support for our podcast, and to Smart Digital for producing this series. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times.